Last night, I posted about seeing something strange. Today, after I got home from school, I investigated the area. The brush is actually taller than 7 feet due to a shallow dip in the ground. What got my attention is that there is a small game trail for rabbits or maybe a coyote. I know the horses aren't to blame because I couldn't fit there. There was quite a bit of small bushes that were flattened by something. There was not any other damage around it, and whatever was there would have had to disturb the brush growing above the flattened bushes. It's all tangled briars at the top. Whatever was there had to have been either behind said brush or somehow hovering over the brush. There's an old oak stump with new tree growth on it, but it doesn't reach that far over. So, I had something pretty weird happen a little over an hour ago. I was standing out by my truck smoking a cigarette. We have about 7 acres with a small forest in the back portion. My parking spot is beside our metal garage, and you could see the front portion of our land from here as well as the far corner where the woods are. Well, I was shining my flashlight through the brush. I live in West Georgia. Coyotes have been attacking our dogs and terrorizing our horses. I saw some weird pair of eyes staring at me from a patch of tall grass. I am 6'3", and the grass there goes up to my ears, so this thing had to have been at least 8 feet tall. The eyes were like a blue flame on a torch. I made eye contact with it, and I thought I saw a smaller second pair behind it. I don't usually go outside much after dark, solely because of the threat of coyotes, and whenever we hear something at night, we grab a loaded AR, and I usually walk around and check things out. I had done that earlier today and didn't find anything, but as soon as I come out without the rifle, I see these pair of eyes. What's a way I can protect myself? I don't think a 5.56 is gonna phase a goddamn skinwalker. I apologize for the length of the post, but maybe somebody can shed some light on what I saw. I work as a paramedic in rural area of Virginia. This entails a lot of backwoods mountain roads late at night. This encounter happened around summer of 2016. One night around 2 or 3 a.m., I was driving back from a call and was traveling up a road I have been up many times before. My partner and I were just listening to music and making the best of being at work. As I rounded an upward slanted curve, the headlight of my unit hit something that still gives me chills to this day as I'm typing. This creature was almost in a position that reminded me of a catcher in baseball, as if it was squatting beside the road, maybe 10 feet in a small grassy patch. It was so pale and white. I distinctly remember its arms and legs being so long, just unnaturally long and slender. Its fingers were the same. If I had to estimate its height, I would say it was easily 6 feet tall. Its head was facing away from me. I honestly did not get a good look to see any facial features. I literally was shocked. I didn't speak a word. I turned to my partner, who was in the passenger seat, and the look on his face told me I was not seeing an imaginary thing. I said to him, "Please tell me what you saw. Keep this PG." He agreed and did it with a lot of colorful words. I may have been 50 yards away when we agreed to turn around and look again. When we get back to the same place, there was nothing. I honestly didn't have the courage to get out of the ambulance to check. My partner did pull out a spotlight we have in our units to check the woods, and again, nothing. I can't stress how pale, bony, and slender this creature was. It was like the pale man from Pan's Labyrinth, but I could see every bone in its body. I only got a 2 to 3 second look at this creature. Does anybody have insight? It was about a month ago that I learned of the crawler identification. While listening to a podcast, actually, and this guest described an encounter with this creature, I finally learned the name of what I feel best describes what I saw in 2002 and 2003. Both of my encounters take place along the Texas border with Mexico. The first encounter, I was with a friend exploring irrigation canals at night in the farmlands near my house. These canals are elevated about 20 feet, and water is down at the bottom of the trench. While driving, the truck's headlights illuminated a small, lanky, gray-white creature on the side of the canal. As soon as the headlights hit the crawler, it leapt into the darkness of the canal, with similar ease as a cat might jump. Both my friend and I immediately shouted, "What was that?" The chupacabra in my area's local cryptid legend, until I learned of the existence of the crawler. I had assumed a chupacabra was what I saw, or some type of alien gray, but the descriptions of the chupacabra don't accurately describe a crawler, and the many descriptions of the crawler are spot on with what I saw. The second encounter was at my house. Occasionally, I would climb up onto the second story of my family home for a bit of stargazing. While lying on my back, staring into the sky, I heard a noise coming from the other end of the roof. Thinking it was probably a possum just messing around, I tilted my head from the sky to the direction of the sound. Something was slowly moving towards me in the dark from the end of the roof. For a few moments, I stayed in place, just trying to focus and make an identification of the animal. It wasn't until the creature got about halfway across the roof my eyes could finally pick up on the features, disqualifying it from being any other animal native to my area. It looked like a small, hairless person, crawling on its long, lanky hands and feet. Needless to say, I didn't stick around any longer. I hauled ass down the tree I'd come up, back to the safety of the house. So, this happened back in 2010. I was 10 years old at the time. During this time, it was a snow blizzard. It hit our city out of nowhere, as our weather is known to be bipolar and have late winters. I lived with my cousins during this time. This blizzard went on for a while. Thick snow, freezing. This blizzard was so unexpected that nobody was prepared for it. Powers were going out, people buying out the water supplies in stores. I remember seeing on the news that people were using barbecue grills inside homes for warmth. This mainly occurred in less fortunate areas. Even though we lived in apartments, we were fortunate enough to have our power on and other needed stuff. To sum up how this blizzard was affecting us, it was so cold to the point trees were falling. I lived on a giant pond, where if you go on our balcony, it would be water. Well, that was frozen. So me being the 10-year-old I am who doesn't want to play in the snow. So me and my cousin, who was 18 at the time, played out in the snow in the daytime. We practically did that every day whenever we got bored. But one day, him and I went outside in the parking lot, outside my apartment, basically in front of my home. The only difference was, we went to go and play in the snow at 6 p.m., and it had already been dark by this time, just because of daylight savings time. We wait until it stops snowing till we go out. So we were playing like normal, building snowmen and walls, anything normal you do in the snow, right? Well, we decided to attempt to make a snow wall, so we needed lots of snow for that. Now, it has been snowing heavy, and where's the best spots to get loads of snow? Off of cars that haven't moved, of course. We start building this wall, and I'm taking snow off of trunks of cars, and there's thick layers. It's the easiest spot to obtain a chunk of snow. After a few back and forward of getting snow off the cars and bringing it to the wall we were building, I notice I haven't touched my sister's boyfriend's car. Wow, that's a lot of snow they haven't left in days. I tell my cousin that let's go get that snow. We were walking towards my sister's boyfriend's car, and we are now at it. We arrive at the trunk, and as soon as I grab a big 2 armful of snow, a very loud click is heard. In confusion, I look around, and then look down and around the car. My cousin and I is a green light in the shape of a circle around us. Now this is freaky enough in the moment. I decided to look up to see what the source of this light was. And what do you know? Nothing was above us. So after noticing the light and nothing being above us, I look at my cousin and start running back home. I'm freaked out, running, looking around everywhere, and as I run home, checking my surroundings, I see a tree fall in the distance. Yeah, it was cold like I mentioned earlier, but this was common during a blizzard. But for this to happen at the moment of this weird phenomenon just adds more chills to the story for me. My cousin and I get inside, and inside was my sister and his sister cooking. We rush in, freaked out, and they're questioning what's wrong. We explain the chain of events that went down, and what do you know? Just like anyone who hears these type of stories, they said we were stupid, crazy, we need to stop playing, etc. Okay, they don't believe us, brush it off. Who would expect anyone to? Now for the rest of that night, my cousin and I just keep peeking out the window very often. Our minds could not clear that. We stayed up all night, kept peeking out the window. We played Black Ops until about 7 a.m., still peeking out the window every 5 minutes. This was not something we were just going to forget, let alone make this up. To this day, he still remembers this moment, a moment that should have been pure, normal fun, into a creepy extraterrestrial sighting, which I believe. I am 18 now, but the details are still clear as day, as I have thought about it often ever since that moment. It is not something you easily forget. My cousin and I talk about this here and there when we see each other, but man oh man, it was a freaky incident. Look, I don't expect you to believe me, but I have had this on my mind for way too long. It is just something too unreal to keep to myself. I have come here to share my experience and I'm looking for thoughts. What are your thoughts? What could it have been? Why did it target us? Why didn't it do anything? To this day, I have one too many unanswered questions, and they will never be answered. I'm just going to have to live with that fact. I'm fishing down at Catagon. It's on the Allegheny River in western Pennsylvania. So I parked at the top ramp going down to the river. Not a boat ramp, just one for backing four wheels down to the water. I go up and it's getting to be just about twilight when I could hear something coming down the hillside across from us. It's steep, but not too steep. Anyway, I hear it barreling down the hillside, but the brush is thick and really high, a better part of 12 feet. Now I'm waiting for a black bear to hop on the road, but it doesn't. It just stops in the middle of the last brush right beside the road. Thinking it was still a bear, I go ushering my friend and his 4-year-old daughter back down to the river. There's a bunch of rocks there from a baseball to a basketball size, so they can defend themselves. I'm still up at my car because I'm less than 5 feet from my door, and this brush is a good 30 feet away, so I know I can make it to my car and distract it with my horn and engine. And yet it never leaves the brush, just shakes it violently. I stand there about 5 minutes and I could see it make its way up the hill. I didn't realize it was pushing the trees around. About 20 feet tall, I'm sure I wasn't connecting anything because of my adrenaline. I'd never seen it, it was too dark by that point. I walk back down to the river and we're gathering up our stuff. It's starting to get way too creepy. We start packing up and I could hear a knocking coming from the hillside. I could see a group of people down the river from us, but they aren't near any trees. They're actually on an outcrop about 20 feet away from the tree line. This knocking is above us and slightly upriver, and even they had reacted to it, looking around and whatnot. I yelled to them, possibly being a bear, and they said they heard something coming down the hillside and seen my buddy running towards the water. They thanked us for the heads up. As soon as they thanked us, a rock came flying off the hillside in between us and them. We actually seen the rock hit the water. They jumped as I did. We really weren't expecting it. I turned around to see if my friend was up on the hill and was messing with us. As I turned, he was just a few feet behind me, holding his daughter, and both were white as ghosts. None of us were expecting that. I decided to reach down and grab a rock and carried it with me just in case it got real. 3 more times we heard these rocks hitting the water, and I had just had enough. Our sight was all cleaned, and I took it as perfect time to retaliate. But I knew where they were being thrown from. That damn brush, so I chucked it. I knew there wasn't any trees around, and I figured if I threw it, it would probably just blow right through it. But it didn't. It made a sound like someone who was beating their chest, and it rolled back towards me. I actually heard whatever I hit get the wind knocked out of it, and it hit the hillside. It takes off down the road towards the other group. They start screaming, and I meant a life being threatened, utter terror scream, and start throwing whatever they could grab at it. I'm just standing there, bewildered and watching them scatter. Few went into the water, and the rest ran towards me. All of a sudden, someone yells, "Get in the truck!" Now they took off to their truck, and I mean it when they said they left everything. Nobody grabbed anything, and they took off. I'll never forget their screams. I ran back up the hill and hopped in my car. My buddy ran up with his daughter right after they started shouting. He was crying, and I've known this man for 20 years, and I could count on one hand how many times I've seen him cry. I started up my car and we high-tailed it out of there. Never seen what it was, but I put everything together later that night. It's been 5 years since it happened, and he absolutely refuses to go down there. Damn shame too, because it's an amazing catfish spot. This all happened within the span of a week. I was messing around with some friends after school by the Salt River. We were talking when we noticed something out of the corner of our eyes. It looked like some kind of human, but with a full set of fur on its body. You bet your sweet butt, me and my friends got out of there as quick as we could. I thought that would be the last we saw of it, but no. We saw it again just a few days later. This time, we were walking up the road near the first place we found it. My friend had to take a whiz, so he went into the woods. A couple of minutes later, I heard him scream. I got the hell out of there as quickly as possible. It turns out he went to pee behind a log and found some footprints. Shortly after this, we heard what sounded like throwing rocks. That's when he screamed. This all happened about 2 years ago. We have not seen it since. I remember 6 years ago when I was 19. Me and a few friends went backpacking in the Appalachian Range of Pennsylvania. We had set up camp in the early afternoon. We knew it was a dangerous area, so we each brought guns for protection against bears. Anyway, as it got closer to the evening, at around 5 p.m., I was fishing in a river about a quarter-mile away from camp, and I started to smell something bad. I couldn't describe the smell, it was just bad. I heard some rustling in the bushes about 200 yards away. It was quite clear that it was footsteps from the sound of it. Almost thinking that it was one of my friends, I realized that they were south of me, so I started to panic. Whatever it was getting closer to me and my fishing spot, and the smell started getting stronger. My fishing pole in my left hand and my right hand on my gun as I was getting ready to unholster it. I couldn't get over the smell, but at the same time, I was worried about my life. I kept my eyes looking in the direction of the loud footsteps. I could see a big open area, kind of like a pasture, about 65 yards away, where the footsteps are coming from. I see what I think is a man in a possible reddish-brown ghillie suit walking behind the trees on the edge of an open area. But the problem is that about 2 to 3 feet taller than me, as I'm only 6'2", which was unbelievable. None of my friends are close to my height, but that thing that I saw was built. I can see the muscle movement of its legs. I'm no expert about Sasquatch, but I do know what I saw was no bear, as it was walking on 2 legs, and not in any way that I've ever seen. Both the legs and arms are primitively built, like an oversized gorilla. The thing probably weighed, about 900 pounds. It ended up vanishing as it went to my right in the deeper part of the woods, but after the footsteps had stopped. I heard what sounded like chatter, kind of like some sort of Indian language. After the chatter stopped, the footsteps started up again. But it was footsteps going in one direction and another sound of footsteps going in the opposite direction. I never told my friends about the experience because I didn't want them thinking that I was crazy. Some people might be skeptic about this, but I know what I saw and heard. Let me start with I'm a 37-year-old who has seen many things from Dogman, alien, ghosts, even what most would call a vampire. Not sure if it was really one or something else. I've sent this to a few more YouTubers like you, but have never heard back. I have an unwanted draw to these things. The encounter I wish to share with you today is one that started back on 2007, just a few years after Hurricane Katrina. I was almost a year into my new job, working on ATMs, and I was driving home from Houma, Louisiana, on Interstate 90. It was quite late, nearly midnight, and I was the only person on the road at the time. You have to watch out for gators crossing on this back highway. I was about a mile or two past the 90, 316 crossing, so you could look it up on Google Maps to see. There in the road was a 6 to 8 foot gator. So I was just seating in my van, waiting for the gator to cross when it goes into attack stance. Coiled the tail up next to the body and head. I could hear it hissing, like there was something out there. I started to look around because a gator that big is not usually scared of anything but boats. From the left side of the road, a large, nearly 10-foot dog-like creature leapt out and attacked the gator. It nearly bit the neck in half, and also left arm claws was digging deep into the stomach of the gator. When the gator stopped moving, the creature stood up. Its eyes sighted red from my headlights. Blood dripped from its claws and teeth. The creature growled and showed its bloody teeth at me. It felt like a lifetime passed before it let out a howl and grabbed the gator and ran off into the woods. But it all happened in just a few moments. I'm not sure it was a dogman or something else like a werewolf. I would like to hear what you think on the matter. I still live in southern Louisiana, very close to Honey Island Swamp, and yes, I do have stories from there. Some of mine are some of my hunters' friends. My encounter happened in winter of 2015. I was shoveling snow in the driveway to make room for some family that was going to visit. Normally, I shovel a space about 2.5 car widths for the family vehicle and my older brother's car beside it. This time, I had to make the path onto the property a little wider and then make space for 2 more vehicles. Being an upstate New Yorker, there is no sense in shoveling while it is still snowing, and the forecast says there's more to come. What I did was put rock salt all over what was already cleared so ice wouldn't form, and then waited for it to lessen or flurries to stop. By the time it stopped, it was about 5 in the afternoon and getting dark. I figured, what the heck, the snow is light enough so I could power through it before long. I've done this all my life, every winter. I've dealt with icy, heavy snow that ruins your back and shoulders and the light fluffy stuff that you see in cozy paintings. I put in my earbuds as I usually do for monotonous work and got to it. Usually, I wear one so I could hear if someone calls me from the house. I wrap the loose one around my neck so it won't tug on the other as I work. Now, this winter had been awful. 2 weeks of single-digit weather and a wind chill between 20 and 30 below zero. Any skin exposed just hurts, and you shake uncontrollably if you aren't dressed in layers with snow pants and a coat, or in my case, thermal coveralls. We're used to this climate, but it can be dangerous if you slip up. A few years before, a guy got stuck in a blizzard and just slept in his car. The thing is, normally snow will cover the car and you're insulated. This was more of a whiteout, so it was blinding more than it was covering. To put it shortly, the cold wasn't buffered by enough snow and this fellow didn't wake up. It's sad, I know. People should never underestimate or underprepare for Mother Nature. To get back to it, I was working as fast as I could when I heard a familiar sound. A neighbor down the road, a ways, Mr. McNeil, was tearing up the road. He has fits of anger where he'll speed off and go into the lesser Catskill Mountains. Basically, if you follow the road northeast from where we lived, you can head into town or go up into the mountains. There are a few dirt paths and narrow trails that only locals really know of or can point out. He's gone from around 5 or 6 p.m. until 6:45. I think he made most of the tire mark paths up there from all his trips. As I turned to watch him drive up the road, I noticed something in the forest across the street. To make a clearer image, I'm standing in our driveway. There is a thin tree line at the end of it, bordering the road. 15 or so feet from the road is the forest. Now, I know what black bears look like. As a kid, they'd be in our backyard now and then. I was 3 feet from 2 of them once, with a back door in between us. I know how big they are, how they move, and what they look like on all 4s, and even 2 feet. This was not a bear. This thing was on all 4s, but rose up on 2 as it turned to see what was making the noise. The head was huge and wolf-like. I could see its tongue quickly moisten its nose. It was very dark brown, near black. I'd say it was easily 7 foot tall minimum. The arms were long and its chest kind of puffed out. My guts went into a knot like never before. As McNeil's headlights came into view, I looked back over the road. He wouldn't even see me if I tried to signal. He must have been going at least 50 miles an hour. He tore up and across before I could even raise up my shovel. That thing was watching the truck, head on a swivel. It kind of ruffled its fur and got back on all 4s. I was slowly walking backward, my heart beating so loud I couldn't hear the caked snow crunching under my feet. Just as I reached the porch and put a foot on the first step, it took off. The thing moved like lightning, taking huge leaps on all 4s. I was going after the truck. I could only think to myself, get inside, get inside. No doubt in my mind, he saw it in his rear view or side mirror. I got inside and told my family what happened. Well, they weren't sold on it being anything other than a bear, of course. Mr. McNeil came back way later than ever, at 9:30. He was slower this time, shining a light in the woods where the creature had been standing. He rolled by slow and kept shining that light back and forth. I'm just glad he came back at all. This would wrap up my experience, but I wanted to add that 6 days later, something terrible happened. A local came into the diner in town with bloody sleeves and hands. His sister, a cook at the diner, came out where he called her to the counter. Before she could ask, he said that the dogs were torn to bits. This guy was a real mountain man. He hunted everything and trained dogs all his life and was shaking like a leaf. 6 80-something pound dogs torn apart. These weren't pets. I met them many times as they grew up. With a half-second whisper, they could swarm anything with a viciousness like you wouldn't believe. He asked for her keys and said he'd leave something in the glove compartment. He didn't want her coming or going without it. We all knew it was a weapon. I looked over to my brother and gave him a face. We went over what I encountered quietly, and I think he was coming around. Also, Mr. McNeil wouldn't say much when he spoke of it, but I think he got a real good look at the thing. He didn't drive off as often anymore. We moved the following year. Not that this had anything to do with it, just personal stuff like work and college. I just want to say that everyone should always have backup kits in their cars for bad weather, and then if you could avoid rural travel at night, do so. My husband and I were driving home down Winchester's Southern Road towards Street Route 22 around 9 p.m. on 12/20/19. It was completely dark outside by this time. We were going around 60 miles an hour. My husband was on high alert for deer. We were just talking to each other when we approached the right-hand turn off to Wyandotte Road. My husband fell silent. He saw a very large, very tall, bipedal creature running toward the road from the left-hand side. Within a split second, I also saw this creature as it continued approaching the road at a full run. It entered into the peripheral of our headlights and came within 2 to 3 feet of the driver's side window. Comparing the creature to our truck, it had to have been nearly 8 feet tall, as it was slightly slouched while running and was a head taller than our truck. It had blondish red fur and domed shoulder head area. Since we were going around 60 miles an hour as all of this happened, it ended up barely missing our truck and crossing the road behind us. We didn't speak for 15 to 20 seconds until my husband finally said, "What was that?" We immediately turned around and traveled down Wyandotte Road in the direction it went behind us, but I did not see or hear anything. We also used a spotlight from the truck to look along the road on both sides where we initially saw it, but did not see any disturbance. The next morning, we stopped at the exact spot again and looked for anything on the ground in the area, but did not see anything. My 2 best friends and I would take night rides into Harriman State Park late at night to see what we could spot at night. For example, bear, deer, fox, etc. It's a beautiful park, and the solitude at night in the off-season makes the park special, and creepy too. As we were driving the very windy Garden Valley Road, we had to go slow due to the turns and danger of the steep drop-offs on the roadside. I was a front seat passenger, high beams on, driving no more than 25 to 35 miles an hour. At the max viability of the headlight, I see the outline of a large upright being running across in front of us and leaping the bank on the high side of the road, instantly disappearing into the rhododendron thickets. I freaked out upon first visual and alerted my friends. The driver hit the brakes, windows open. We could hear thrashing of the ground from running, but the sighting was over. My friend, the driver, did see the movement but couldn't make out what made it. We both agreed on the sound of it fleeing up the steep slope. What solidified my 2 friends' belief in what I saw was the look of fright and amazement on my friend's face. Features of the upright being I saw were large, thick hair-covered legs, human-like strides, and tall enough that the headlights did not focus above its midsection, so I couldn't make out any facial features. We were not drinking or doing any illegal substances. So, I'm an avid hunter, and I used to hunt the Corps of Engineers land on the Texas side of the Red River. I was going to get my trail camera and check the pictures for any sign of wild hogs moving along the river and eating at the bait I had set up. When I pulled up to the parking area, I was the only truck there. It's hot in the summer, and in those woods, there is little breeze. It's about a 20-minute walk through the woods to the camera, so I had navigated my way through the brush and had come around the old piece of original bridge supports and turned slightly northwest, and something yelled at me about 100 yards away through the woods. It's hard to describe the noise. It didn't taper off, just a blast. I froze, and I don't know why, but my instinct was to whoop at it. I whooped, and it remained frozen too. I knew where it was, but I couldn't see it through the trees. I raised my rifle to locate whatever it was through the scope. I systematically started searching, and all of a sudden, it tore off through the woods. I saw a glimpse of it through the scope as it took off. What I saw is difficult to explain, but you know how a skier's legs look when they are crouched? It was like that, like a spring compressing the knees to unleash power. The sun shone through the trees, and I could see the legs had reddish-brown fur, but was shaggier than a deer. Almost like coarse hog hair, but was soft. Everything about this makes me want to say it was a deer. The fur color, the legs bent. I would even entertain a deer having shaggier fur. But the yell is what makes me know it was something else. Its yell was intimidating and demanding. It knew I was there, and was letting me know it was there. After it ran off, I was filled with a sense of dread and had to talk myself out of not going back to the truck and leaving the camera. My daughter attends the University of Western Florida, and I had just finished getting her settled in her dorm room, stocked up on groceries and other essentials. I left in the late morning to head back home, which is east of Pensacola, some 3+ hours. All through the first hour or so, there were tremendous rain bands like we are used to here in Florida. As I was traveling on Interstate 10, the trailer trucks would put a literal fog of water spray, so I wasn't going more than 50 miles an hour. As I got out of the last rain band, the sky got brighter and brighter to the point where I could get back up to 70 miles an hour. I was still following a car, about 10 car lengths. I checked the rear view and no traffic behind, and I remember looking around the car ahead and nothing for some distance. I was just about ready to pass the white car when he put his brakes, and I closed distance to him fairly quickly. I braked also, not knowing what was ahead of him. Maybe a truck tire carcass, and he could swerve into my lane and I pass him. Even though I am driving a pickup truck, I ride a motorcycle and sort of drive like I ride, very defensively. As I slowed, I noticed some movement off the road. We were both in the right lane. On the other side of the guardrail, something caught my eye. We had just come over either a swampy area or a small creek, so there was a guardrail over that area. Still, there was a gully between the guardrail and the tree line, maybe 20 feet deep. Almost instantly, I thought bear, but wrong color. Our bear here are jet black, and if they stand and you have the rare chance to see that, they aren't very tall. The next thought I had was a man in a ghillie suit, but wrong again. This was not material, it was hair. Matted down, wet hair. And the height, maybe 8 feet. It was huge. So as I saw it, by this time I was almost stopped. The car ahead directly abeam of the creature and stopped or very slow. What I saw was a living creature, everything articulated perfectly. Head, arms, and legs. I had a profile to a back view of it, saw its muscles in the upper back. The color wasn't exactly uniform, but varied between shades of chocolate brown. The head looked rounded. I couldn't see ears or a neck, but it definitely had a head, and looked down before stepping into the gully. At that time I saw arms that moved, but really saw the separate legs and saw what was matted hair stuck together from the leg. It stepped down, rounded the gully, and out the other side to go into the tree line. Its motion was very smooth, almost like it was gliding. So, even if a man could don a suit and act like an 8-foot-tall living creature, how would he manage to walk down a steep embankment that was grassy and wet? Any human would be on his ass or tumble dangerously down that embankment. Anyway, I hurriedly called the wife, who laughed at me for a minute or two, but then realized I was serious. She said, "Get the license plate of the car," which I didn't, and "Where are you?" I was surprised that I hadn't done all of that. Frankly, I think I was dazed. Well, I know there is someone else that saw this thing, but that is about all. I would estimate this thing weighed about 400 to 500 pounds. It wasn't fat or barrel-chested. It wasn't skinny either, like it didn't have enough to eat. It was healthy and athletic in appearance, and it sure covered a difficult area in no time. By the way, this interstate highway cuts through the England. As I recall, I recently had to do a DoorDash delivery from Houston to a foresty suburb in Pasadena. I was driving down a dark forest road at 1 a.m. I was feeling a little spooked because it was so damn dark on the road and empty. I honestly didn't even expect to do a delivery all the way from Houston to Pasadena, so I was annoyed, even though the pay was decent. All of a sudden, as I'm driving, some flying animal almost hits my dashboard and flies right past me as I'm driving. My reaction was from surprise to excitement, as I had just seen something crazy. From what I had seen, it was a bat, but about the size of my windshield. And to be honest, I have never seen such a huge bat in Texas to this very day. Any of you guys ever had encounters with abnormally larger humanoids? This is going to sound pretty unbelievable, but it scared the crap out of me. I used to live in this huge trailer house. It was 60 to 100 feet from front to back. That night, everyone else was sleeping in the front of the house since we didn't have school the next day. I decided to sleep in the back by myself. I'm not what you call a psychic, but I do seem to attract weird experiences. I was up late reading a book on spirits and getting rid of them. It was around midnight when I went to bed. All evening I had a growing feeling something was wrong. I was getting more and more uneasy, to the point where I was almost sick. I finally decided to go to bed and went to turn out the light. It turned off and laid in bed. In the room I used to have, the bathroom was right across the room, directly facing the bed. I turned around so my back was facing the bathroom. As soon as I did, I heard a growling behind me. It got closer and I heard footsteps with it. I felt this thing lean over me. I actually smelt its breath. I didn't directly see it though. I could have chalked it up to sleep paralysis, except for one thing. As I was laying there, it either drooled or dropped some kind of sticky liquid on my head. It kept growling the whole time. Eventually, it stood up straight, and I got the impression it was really tall, like 7 or 8 feet. I had laid there not doing anything, and then all of a sudden burst of courage come up, and I decided to turn around. I did this to find nothing there. I remember seeing its ears leaning over me, and the sulfur-like smell it gave off. I know I didn't dream it because when I got up, my hair was still wet and sticky from where it had drooled on me. I don't know what it was. Does anybody out there know? This happened to me and my stepbrother around 7 years ago. My grandpa owns about 40 acres of woods, and he took us out there, and he ended up falling asleep. And me and my brother did the most cliche thing. We went to venture in the woods without telling my grandpa. We had walked in for about an hour when we saw a sheet of metal hanging on barbed wire. We were unsettled but curious nonetheless, and by now we're in deep woods and we see a large tree up ahead, and we run up to it and see dead cows and their insides thrown all over the tree. At this point, we were terrified, and we began to run back the way we came. And as we're running, something was chasing us until we got back to the barbed wire, and it stopped. We made it back and told my grandpa, but of course, he didn't believe us. Fast forward to a couple of weeks ago, and one of my cousins is hunting out there, and they leave their truck overnight as it got stuck in the mud. When they returned, it had been lit on fire 3 to 4 miles in the middle of the woods. I plan on going out there with some friends and a couple of guns. Any advice? This seems like to be the only place I could possibly get some answers. Before I tell my story, I figured I'd give a little backstory, of course. This happened a few years ago when I was living in Arizona in the middle of nowhere. I've since moved to the East Coast where there are no skinwalkers, thank God. I also had 2 German Shepherds and I still have them now. It was probably like the middle of June and sometimes I'd like to sleep with my window open. There was a screen so the window wasn't completely open. As I mentioned above, I have 2 German Shepherds. The older one, named Archer, slept on the floor in the bigger of the 2 dog beds, while the younger one, Nissa, tended to sleep on the bed with me. It had been around 2 in the morning when I jolted awake to the sound of Nissa growling at something outside. I looked around and Archer was nowhere to be found. I could have swore I'd let him back in the house before going to bed, but I was starting to think that I hadn't. I got closer to the window and looked out. I saw, or at least I thought I saw, Archer sitting outside. He is a rather large dog, so he's hard to miss. His appearance seemed a bit off. His back legs were up higher than his front legs, and his face was kind of strange. It was misshapen, and his nose looked longer than usual. I swear he's part wolf or something, so his muzzle is shorter than a normal German Shepherd. Nissa was still raising hell on my bed, so I tried to get her to stop by calling her name. That was the only thing I said in this short time. Just a quick, "Nissa!" and I turned back to the window. As I was looking out the window for what had felt like an eternity, having an intense stare down with Archer, I heard something coming back into my room. I turned and I saw Archer, who was looking up at me before he too started to growl outside at the thing. I was so stunned, the only thing that pulled me out of my haze was my own voice saying, "Nissa." Only I hadn't opened my mouth, nor was I speaking. The noise was coming from outside, from that thing that was outside my window. It almost sounded exactly like me, but there was something weird about the voice. It was almost crackly. The only way I can describe it is demonic. Needless to say, it scared me half to death. I slammed the window shut, shooed my dogs out of my room, and locked us in the bathroom until morning. I never had another experience after that, but to this day, I don't sleep with my window open anymore. This happened to my big brother when he was 15. We grew up on the Navajo reservation in Arizona. He was coming home from hanging out with a friend, and it was probably around 2, because his curfew was at 11, and my guardian had been up a while. I know this because she was talking to my mom in the kitchen, and was super angry and loud, and I stayed up listening to them argue. When he came in, my guardian started to tell him off, but stopped because he was crying and talking in a hysterically frightened tone. Apparently, he came in the back gate and saw a coyote standing propped up on its hind legs against the back door, looking in the window. This wasn't so odd because it was Arizona, but when he came closer, the coyote turned its head to look at him, and as it did, it turned its whole body and started walking toward him on 2 legs, like a man. My brother swears it looked too big for a coyote as it came at him. He ran back out the gate and came around to the front door. To this day, he still cries talking about it. He's convinced that he encountered a skinwalker watching over our family. I also remember a wicked-looking eagle following me everywhere I went up there. So much so that as a kid, I talked to it and considered it one of my closest friends. And I know it sounds crazy, but as a kid, I remember telling it a really crappy joke I'd love and hearing laughter in my head. First off, here's a little information about my backyard. It's pretty long and connects to an alleyway, and all the way at the back we have 2 poles that have been used for hanging clothes out to dry. They're probably about 6.5 feet tall. Connecting to my house in the yard is a porch. It's basically a room with 2 of the walls taken out and replaced with wire mesh. And now to the actual story. We live in a 2-bedroom house with me, my cousin, her son, my mom, and my grandfather. Me and my mom used to share a room until my cousin got pregnant, so she gave up our room so she wouldn't be sleeping on an uncomfortable couch. For a while, my mom and I slept in the living room, her on the couch and me on the air mattress. Up until 2 years ago, my mom reverted a room in our basement into a bedroom for me for Christmas so I can get some privacy. For myself, basically. My mom still sleeps in the living room on the couch, so she doesn't have any privacy, except for the back porch. So she pretty much just sits out there all day. It had to have been a year or 2 ago, in late summer, early fall, but she was sitting on the porch, as she usually does, and she looks out into the backyard and sees something standing in the alley, right behind our fence. It was pretty dark out, so she couldn't make out exactly what it looked like, but she said it had a human figure, was completely white, and about the size of the poles we had in the yard. She told me that it hopped the fence no problem and started sprinting at her, like if it were running a marathon or something. It then got a couple feet away from the porch window, and then just disappeared. She said that she was so scared that she was completely frozen the entire time. She didn't move her body for a good 20 seconds because she was scared that if it saw her move, it was going to come back. She just kept moving her eyes to get them to adjust to the dark so she could see if there was anything still there outside. To come outside to the porch, you need to walk through the kitchen, and that's where I was. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she burst through the door and runs to the sink to get a knife. So now I'm panicking because I thought there was a murderer outside or something, and then she tells me what happened. We both stayed there for a good hour just looking out the kitchen window to see if this thing was still there. I haven't talked to her about all that then since, until now, mostly because I just forgot. I just wanted to share and see what people thought. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not good at writing these stories, and so I've tried my best. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments. Hello. I had an experience with one of these beings when I was around 8 years old, and it's really baffled me ever since. I'm glad others have seen them too, and look forward to reading other encounters. I was around 8 in the lounge at home. The lounge was at the end of a hallway, and at the other end of the hallway was a disabled bedroom shower for my dad. To the left and to the right was a door leading to the garage and garden. I can't remember what I was doing in the lounge at the time, but all of a sudden, I had a really powerful urge to look at the end of the hallway. We had recently bought a coat stand from a boot sale, and this was in the middle of the hallway now. As I stood there, I saw a human outline, but entirely filled with TV-like static. I remember little bits of yellow and blue in it, but it was mainly white, and it came out of the bedroom on the left and was in a running stance. But it was really weird because it was in slow motion, and it ran from the left to the back door on the right. As it ran, it grabbed the coat and pulled it down with it, and it fell to the floor. I was just standing there in shock and so scared. I ran to my sister and told her what had happened. When we went back to the hallway, the stand was still on the floor. That was the only time I saw it. I don't know why I saw it or why it pulled the stand down or what it was, but it was just so surreal. I don't know if this was a cryptid or if this is paranormal or what. I did have some other experiences in that house that were paranormal deemed, so maybe it was connected. It's currently midnight, and this all went down about 45 minutes ago. My brother decided to make a late night run to the grocery store, but on his way back his tire exploded, so he called my dad to come pick him up from the gas station that he managed to pull into. There are some sketchy folk around that area, so my dad suggested we just change the tire and escort him home to make sure that some donut didn't go flat too, because it's fairly old. My dad calls me and asks me to bring me tools and a jack so we can change the tire. After the donut is on, my dad goes in front and my brother follows, and of course, I follow behind my brother. We live on a back road off of a back road. Not many houses, lots of farmland, and not much traffic, with lots of deer at night, so my dad and I turned on our LEDs that we use when we go off-roading, when we go to our roads so we could see deer well before they were a hazard. The fields stretch about a quarter mile from the road on either side, and the lights are bright enough so that I can just barely see the tree line past the fields. We get up to a bend in the road where a small patch of woods separates the field from the house beside it, and I see glowing eyes to my left about 15 feet away from the patch of woods on the field side. There were lots of deer out, so I was already on high alert. I slowed down and kept an eye on it. This thing, whatever I was looking at, had arms. It had a humanoid shape, a humanoid head. It was not far from the road, so it was lit up pretty bright. I have no doubts in my mind about what I saw. I was going about 15 miles an hour. It wasn't just a quick glimpse either. I looked at it for at least 30 seconds before it was out of view. Once I realized that I had never seen anything like what I was seeing, I started honking my horn and pointing so that my brother and dad in front of me would look. But by then they had already passed by the patch of woods and could not see it. I would guess it was maybe around 6 to 7 feet tall when standing, but it appeared to be either hunched over or kneeling on the ground. It was resting one elbow on something, and the other arm was straight. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Nosferatu, but its head and face looked very similar to Nosferatu's. It looked gaunt and pale, and even had pointed ears and glowing eyes. I'm sure the glow was because of the lumens I was shining at it, but at the least it tells me it's a nocturnal living creature. I live in North Carolina if that helps anyone in figuring out what this is. I'm very concerned because it wasn't far away from my home, and I've been hearing very strange noises at night the past few weeks. I took my puppy out to use the bathroom yesterday around 10 p.m. and I could hear something in the forest walking very slow. I know it wasn't a deer because the puppy was barking and it didn't run off. I didn't have a flashlight, so I just kept my gun out in case it was a predator and it tried to eat my puppy. It was snapping big sticks and it sounded heavy. I'm convinced it wasn't a bear because we don't live in bear country. We've never seen any bear around here and we go into the woods a lot. We also have a chain link fence all the way around our property line, including in the woods. We inspect it often and I walked the perimeter today and none of it was damaged. Whatever this is, it's agile and smart enough to climb and jump over a fence without noticeably damaging it. A few months ago, I also noticed a lot of scratches on the trees around my house. They were all no less than 7 foot off the ground, so in my mind that took a mountain lion out of the equation. If anyone finds this description familiar, please let me know. I was with 2 of my friends exploring this mountain next to an abandoned whiner where apparently a family died there, and on our way down from climbing the mountain after we spotted a dark figure with our camera at the top from an old farm where we got to the bottom. We went over the hill a little and I say a family that looked like a ghost. This happened 1 year ago when we ate food and went back out an hour later, and then we saw an unidentifiable object in the sky, and it looked like it crashed into the same mountain where we just were and went back, and nothing was there. So, a year ago, me and a friend were coming back from going swimming in a local town. My friend lives in a little town called Holton. As we were cycling along, my friend's tire collapsed, so we tried fixing it. Suddenly, a howl erupts from the woods, and with me binge-watching nature documentaries and knowing a bit about animals, I couldn't place it. It was incredibly deep, and the entire woods and wilderness fell silent. We worked harder and harder, with one of us looking over the woods we were in. After a while, I saw it. 2 red eyes and pointy ears behind a bush around 50 meters away from us. As we bolted, we decided to come back today. It really scared us when we came back and saw that the bush it was looking over was as tall as me. I was 5'3" at the time. The beast I saw was a hellhound. I was black powder hunting alone on a private property. The property has a gated entrance, and I parked my 4-wheeler there, and normally walked in the remaining 200 yards to my elevated deer stand. As I shut my 4-wheeler off and put on my backpack, I heard a very large limb snap and thought it was a deer or animal moving around, maybe only 20 yards away. So I didn't think anything about it, gathered my gun and hunting stuff, and started walking down the 2-track trail without my flashlight on, due to having good enough light from the moon to see where I was walking. I hunted here a long time and knew the trail. This trail ended in a 15-acre hayfield surrounded by old-growth timber. As I walked in the dark, I quickly realized something was paralleling my every step just inside the woods. I walked and stopped, and it would do the same. By the time I realized I might have a problem on my hands, it was too late to go back to the four-wheeler. So, I picked up my pace and made a beeline for my tree stand. When I got within 10 yards of the stand, I heard another large limb snap really close to the edge of the field on my left. I stopped, turned my flashlight on, and shined that in the direction. I seen two glowing green eyes about 10 inches apart. Instinctively, I raised my rifle and stomped my foot at it and yelled, "Get out of here!" Not really sure what I was seeing. It just blinked its eyes once and never moved. I could not make out any details, just that it may have been crouched down due to the proximity of the eyes to the ground. Whatever this was didn't run like most non-predatory animals would. I realized that, in an instant, the best thing to do was bolt up my ladder and get in the stand as quickly as possible. This was no more than 8 steps away, and if I shot at it, I would have been blinded by the muzzle flash, and it might attack if I missed in the dark, and not having a way to reload quickly. I made an evasive move. The rest of the time I waited in the stand for daybreak, it circled my stand, just out of the light shine. Approximately 1 minute before daybreak, I heard bipedal steps go into the woods where it had followed me from. I waited till daylight and quickly made my way back to my four-wheeler. As I jumped on the machine and just before I fired it up, I heard another branch or limb snap loudly in the woods off the trail behind me. I left the area and went back home and cut the week-long hunt short and didn't return until the following spring. I've never hunted the same way again since, and rarely go in before after dark on foot unless I absolutely have to, and if I do, I always have a sidearm. I've since sold that property and hunt in my home state of Indiana, and I could honestly say one thing for sure. If I had had a shotgun or a high-powered rifle in my hand with more than one shot, I felt threatened enough to use it that day. This thing was not scared of me at all, and it changed the way I look at the woods and forests forever. Thinking back on that morning and the days leading up, I now remember that I hadn't seen the normal wildlife signs and visual activity I normally saw. I am in a part of North Dakota. An unlikely place, I know, but there's this one specific area on the outskirts that I always get a bad vibe from. One day, we were smoking there, and my friend thought he saw something creeping up. I didn't see anything, but from what I heard, it was large and moving very slowly. Everyone in the group booked it out, and one of my friends is native, and he swears he believed it was one. There are a lot of coyote around in that area, so I thought it was probably just that since I didn't actually see anything. But another day, we were on the outskirts of this spot. It's a good smoke spot, so we were always around there. And in the tree near us, there was a giant owl. It was the first time I've ever seen one here, and for some reason, it gave a really bad vibe, and somehow looked off. That's really the only way I can explain it. The way it stood on the branch, facing away from us, with its head down, and its wing, or something like that, was very dark, so it was kinda hard to see, and we didn't stick around to look very long. So I had no idea, but some of my friends are thoroughly convinced. Ever since then, I found myself strangely drawn to that place, and find myself going there for no reason and sitting. I've heard they can control your mind to an extent, and am wondering if that's not what's going on. Any advice and opinions are welcome, but I'm certain that I did see a skinwalker or something. My grandparents have a cabin in a town in Pennsylvania, south of Scranton. Every summer, we usually go up for a few weeks as a family event. Ever since I was little. A few years ago, we decided to go in the winter because my family wanted to go skiing at some point. After we get there, the weird things start happening really quickly, and seemingly out of nowhere. The house was built in the 1920s, old brick and wooden. The doors are these giant, almost church-looking doors, and the style of home is very medieval, definitely just adding to the creepy vibes of the home. The first night was seemingly calm through the house, but whenever I went there, I always felt that there was something watching me, or something lurking through the halls. The first night I got up to go to the bathroom at around 3:10, which is also interesting because I never get up to go to the bathroom back at home. Most nights I sleep right through it without ever waking up. There were 8 of us in the house. My 2 parents, my grandparents, my aunt, my uncle, and my male cousins, 2 of them of course. I went to one of the 3 main bathrooms, 4 in the house if you count the master. So when I heard someone was in there, I thought that was interesting, because I was one of the few people who doesn't share the bathroom. But I stood outside, waiting to make sure I did not intrude on anything going on in there, as my one cousin can get quite upset and I didn't want to bother him. What was extremely weird is the fact that whatever was in there didn't sound human in its movements. It dragged its feet around, or so it sounded, which made me nervous that it might be sick. I called out his name a few times. "Drew, are you okay in there? It's been a long time and I want to go to bed." Or something along those lines. A few seconds later, he comes out of his bedroom and asks me why I'm making so much noise. Tells me he's trying to sleep and slams the door behind him. Before I could freak out, he had already shut the door, and I was too scared to even yell back to him. I never realized before that the door wasn't even locked in the first place, which made me feel even more uneasy. Between the banter, I never realized that the sounds had stopped, and it didn't seem like anybody was in the bathroom anymore. I still even tell myself this was just my imagination, but I'm not known for sleepwalking or having any type of sleep disorder. I decided to just open the door, brushing it off as my too vivid imagination. When I opened the door, it looked like nothing strange had happened in there. But when I was washing my hands, I realized the window was open, and I froze, thinking somebody had broken into the house. But this was on the 2nd story, with nothing to climb up on, making it almost impossible to climb up there, unless of course you had a ladder, but obviously there was none. The next day, nothing happened in the daytime, making it seem more to me that it was just a figment of my imagination than reality. But that night, I had to let the dog out. She is elderly and never really barks much, nor does she run fast. So this definitely is a case for concern, I thought. When I let her out, she bolted to the edge of the woods and vanished inside of them. I tried to follow her barking, but honestly, I was too scared to go into the woods past the tree line. When I finally got her to walk back, her back legs seemed off, almost like a person pretending to be a dog walking on the ground. Her eyes were also off. They looked human-like, not her usual dark almond eyes. I freaked out and ran back inside without her. When I got inside, she was sitting, panting by the door, so she must have ran back in when I was yelling into the woods to try and find her. At this point, I didn't even want to leave that house, for fear of what was lurking in the woods. I had no previous information on skinwalkers or even knew what they were, so I had not yet connected the dots. The last night we stayed there was the most interesting and confusing turn of events that had happened. We had skied all day, so we went to bed quite early, around 9 to 10. I never fell asleep early, as I'm usually a night owl myself. But I woke up around 12 a.m. to the sounds of my cousin Drew yelling outside. I woke up in a fog and tried to quickly rush to the door and open it. I didn't even take into consideration that the door was still locked from the inside. When I got outside, his voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions and echoing throughout the valley. I saw him by the cars, yelling, and when I started to go outside and call his name, he looked at me quickly. His eyes got huge and he ran into the woods, with a beckoning gesture for me to follow. I decided that that was definitely a bad idea, so I woke up his parents and he ended up being asleep in his room the entire time. Not now, until years later, did I even find out about skinwalkers from one of my Native American friends that I met in college. I still have no idea what was out there that weekend, and I haven't been back since. This story is 100% true, and I'm writing it on here to warn other people and let them know that there's definitely something out there, and to this day, I still don't know what it was. Nor have I ever gone into any woods or forest whatsoever. If you don't believe me, that's completely fine. Read this as a fun story at your own expense. But for those of you out there with an open mind, or you've seen something yourself, just know you are not alone. And just typing out and remembering this account is causing me to shake with anxiety and fear. First off, I'm a girl and live in North Carolina of the United States. I was 15 at the time of my encounter and was definitely not a believer in anything supernatural, paranormal, or anything of the sort. It happened while I was at a local summer camp. There was absolutely nothing special about that day. No weird lights, people, animals, sounds, nothing. It was just the same camp schedule as I'd grown used to in the past 2 weeks I'd been there. My age group had just finished lunch and was about to be able to persuade our counselor to let us play a game called Scatter Down by the Lake. It's like a giant hide and seek in the woods. Now, we had played this at least 20 times before that day, and nothing weird had happened to any of us, and we all grew up playing in the woods, so it's not like we had any aversion or fear of it. But for some reason that day, when our counselor shouted, "Scatter!" and I ran to find a hiding place, it became a whole new ballgame. I had run as far as I could while still being able to see the lake, as were the rules, and had found a huge old uprooted tree that I decided would be the perfect hiding place. So, I laid down as close as I could against the ground and waited. I had been there for about 5 minutes when I suddenly heard a voice calling my name in a weird dreamy-like voice, and not just any voice, my mom's. Now, me and my mom are extremely close, thick as thieves, so I'd know her voice anywhere, and I would swear on my own grave it was without a doubt hers. But I knew it couldn't be her. She was 20 miles away at work, and even if it had actually been her, she'd come to pick me up early. The voice wasn't coming from the lake. It was coming from further out in the woods, beyond the border of the camp. I knew I should have run away from this strange mimic mom voice, but I couldn't. It was almost hypnotic. It messed with my thoughts and gave me doubts, like, well, it could be mom, or what if she's hurt, and I have to get her now? All these things were flooding into my mind, like somebody had broken a dam and I didn't know it was there, until they finally overwhelmed me and emotions got the better of me, and I took off running in the direction the voice was coming from. I ran as far as I could with only this strange voice as my guide. I couldn't have run for more than 5 or 7 minutes when I got to a clearing and the voice suddenly stopped. When I entered the clearing and didn't hear my mom's voice calling me anymore, I could finally think clearly again and started to have little alarm bells going off in my head saying, "You idiot. That's not mom and you better run." But I couldn't run. I didn't know where to run. I had gotten so far away, I had lost sight of the lake by camp and had absolutely no idea where I was, and I was completely exhausted to boot. With no other options than to just sit there and catch my breath, I did just that. No sooner had I sat down, more warning bells went off in my mind. I quickly did a 360 survey around the clearing and noticed a strange noise. It wasn't the continuation of the voice before, no. It was the distinct sound of chattering teeth, like if you were cold, only there was no one else around, and it was the middle of June in North Carolina. There's no way someone would be cold. And that's when I heard it. Leaves and sticks crunching on the edge of the small clearing. And I realized something was watching me. And then whatever it was moved fast in circles around the clearing, almost like it was circling prey. And it was at that moment I knew whatever it was had led me out there away from the rest of my group, exactly like the predator instincts had been screaming at me that it was. Without any other option, I tried to escape. I took off in the direction I thought I came from and sprinted as fast as I could, all the while hearing the chittering of teeth and sticks crunching behind me. I didn't know what to do. I didn't dare turn around and see what was chasing me. I knew that if I did, I would slow down, and I absolutely would not. It felt like a lifetime running away from this thing before I finally saw the lake. And even though I didn't think I could run any faster, I ran faster than I ever have in my life. When I broke the tree line and ran to the lake where I knew my friends were, at that point, I felt safe enough to stop and look back and see just what had been chasing me. But when I did, I only saw a fleeting form running back the way I had come, and the distinct sound of chittering teeth. When I finally found my counselor, who was the seeker to find all of us, I was hysterical with fear and hugged her as tight as I could. When I finally calmed down, she tried to get me to tell her what happened, but I just asked, "Were you calling my name?" Before she even said anything, I already knew the answer. After all, it had been my mom's voice that led me away from everyone else. But what she said, replied with, was so much more bone-chilling to me. She told me, "No one called for you. We didn't even know you were gone. Everyone is still hiding. The game isn't even over yet." So, about a year and a half ago, me and my sports team went on a camping trip in Mammoth, California for some team bonding, I guess. We weren't exactly in the middle of the woods, but definitely in the woods. We were there for about 4 nights, and on the second night, I woke up pretty abruptly. Everyone else was asleep except me. I looked at the time, and it was something like 3:15 in the morning. I laid in my sleeping bag, back for a few minutes, and shortly after I heard a sound that haunts me to this day. It sounded like a man, but it sounded unnatural. It sounded like this man, or whatever this thing was yelling through a tunnel. However, I wouldn't describe it as a yell. It sounded more like someone was talking. It had almost a supernatural echo to it that made me completely freeze. No animal could have had that kind of range to its voice. This noise was then followed by slow footsteps near my tent. I felt an overwhelming sense of fear, despite being in a tent with 5 other guys, and in another 6 guys in the other tent. In the morning, no one else seemed to have heard what I heard, and I didn't talk about it with anybody. Not sure if it could have been a skinwalker, but any explanation would be greatly appreciated. Alright, everyone. So I had a recent encounter with, well, something. I'm not sure what it was, as I never actually saw it. But the encounter seems to be in line with things I've read here and other places. So, here it goes. It was approximately 2 weeks ago, just before Halloween. Now, let me start by saying I'm not an avid outdoorsman. I love hiking, and I've spent countless hours in my city's 16 square mile state park, nature reserve, whatever you want to call it. But I'm not a mountain man by any means. The park is home to several indigenous mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles, a full pond, thick brush, and even swampy marshes in certain spots. There are designated hiking and biking trails that sprawl the entire area, but there are also several wild areas that aren't really maintained or used well. Being that I have an adventurous streak, and that I also hate being around groups of people, I often find myself in these less ventured or wild areas. Now, it's worth noting that I've never really felt uncomfortable in this park. It's kind of like my safe place. I go there to get away, decompress after work, or just to be alone sometimes. It feels like it's second home in a way. Anyway, enough background information, I'm rambling. I just pulled up to one of the less commonly fished ponds, Beaver Lake, and I intended to circle the far side on one of the hiking trails that goes right next to the tree line, and then into the tree line, and then push further back onto one of the old horse trails. Now, this horse trail in particular doesn't get used much more anymore. I can't say why for sure, but I've heard a myriad of different reasons from different people. The most logical explanation is that it's just not as convenient to get to anymore, and it gets pretty marshy when it rains. I'd be able to follow the normal hiking trail for the first 3/4 of a mile, but I'd have to fork left off the trail once it went into the tree line. The gate to the old horse trail was about 500 yards to my 9 o'clock from there, just through an overgrown thicket and up a slight hill. I made my way over the 4-foot gate and started exploring. I had about an hour and a half before sunset, and I have a strict screw the woods at night policy, so I was watching the time. My main goal for this adventure was to snap some pictures of the area for a project that I had been working on, and I'll admit, I was more distracted than I typically am. Anyway, close to an hour had passed. I'd gotten some good shots, and I figured now was a good time for my egress. It'd take me close to 30 minutes to get back to my truck, and I wasn't keen on getting stuck in an unfamiliar area at night. I sat my backpack down on a stump, dropped to one knee, and started packaging and organizing my stuff. I am not sure what the catalyst was, but I suddenly felt this terrible sense of dread. I slowly turned and scanned my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. I stood up and grabbed my bag. When I took a step forward, a leaf crunched under my boot, and I realized that everything was dead silent. Now, as I said above, I am not an avid outdoorsman by any means, but I know well enough that silence like this is an indication that a predator is in the area, and you need to quickly but calmly make your way out of the area and stay vigilant. It's worth noting that while mountain lions and black bear are technically indigenous to my area, there have been more than enough caught and relocated for it to be a valid concern. I've been stalked by a mountain lion on one other occasion, and this felt eerily similar, so that was at the forefront of my mind. I'd been moving for probably 5 minutes, and everything seemed fine. I'd lulled myself into believing that I was just overreacting, and that everything was fine. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Good, right? Well, wrong. By this point, the trail was completely overgrown on both sides. I could see fairly clearly behind me and a decent way ahead, but my left and right may as well have been fall-colored walls. I must have gotten lost in thought for a moment, because I tripped on a root and ate shit. As I was picking myself up, I started hearing a soft, cooing or chittering off to my right. It sounded like a mix between a dove and the predator. It would start with a coo or yelp and end with this weird chittering sound. I'm actually sitting here trying to replicate it, and I sound ridiculous. I'm not sure my throat is even capable of recreating it accurately. Anyway, I'm out of shape and there's no way I'm outrunning anything. So I scrambled up, planted my feet, and tried to make myself look as menacing as a fat 22-year-old with a backpack and glasses can look. About 100 yards ahead of me, which would have originally been behind me had I not fallen, So toward where I was taking the pics was moving away from, I saw the underbrush start to shake, and it sounded like something was tearing through it. I only had maybe 20 minutes of daylight left at this point, and it would take me at least that long to make it way back to my truck. So, I did exactly what you are not supposed to do. Naturally, I turned around and I fucking booked it, knowing good and damned well that I can run for maybe a half mile. 3/4 of a mile if something's trying to kill me, maybe. I could barely hear anything over my own footfalls and the sound of my heart pounding. But whatever it was chasing me through the underbrush, and it was gaining on me. It may have been 15 yards behind me at this point, and I still had a ways to go. I don't know if fear kept me going or what, but I reached the deeper and just kept running. My breathing got shallow, my vision started to blur, and I was honestly about to collapse when I saw the gate to the horse trail about 300 yards ahead of me. This thing is right on top of me by now, and as soon as I came within arm's reach of the gate, I planted my foot on the bottom rung and launched myself over it. My landing was not graceful. I landed on my right shoulder and tumbled several yards down the hill into a puddle of muck. I wasn't thinking straight now, and I stood up shakily and started making my way toward the tree line and pond. I knew what direction to go, and I didn't even bother finding the hiking trail. I just crashed through the brush and overgrowth like some kind of barbarian. I didn't care about the cuts or the scrapes, or even the massive amounts of noise I was making. My only thought was to get out. The chittering noises had stopped, but I still heard something moving in the brush at the top of the hill. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore either. I finally broke through the tree line and could see my truck parked across the pond at the top of the hill. I finally took a deep breath and started slowly walking my way away from the tree line. The ominous feeling had lifted, and I started making my way up the trail alongside the tree line. I was able to catch my breath for about 15 seconds. I heard that god-awful cooing and chittering behind me again, and I turned to look back at the tree line behind me. So at the point there's a trail leading into the tree line in front of me, tree line to my right, water to my left, and the trail leading alongside the tree line and around the pond to the cars behind me. The underbrush of the tree line ahead of me started to shake and fear took over. I'm thankful that my bag is waterproof and that my phone is water resistant because I jumped in the pond and I swam across. I've never really told this story to anyone in my personal life. They'd probably think I'm crazy, and I doubt they'd consider me reliable or credible, especially given my interest in Bigfoot and cryptids in general. I don't know what was stalking me that day. I know I wound up cold, wet, and a bit shaken up. I also know I've been back at the park, at least at that part of the park, and I can't come up with a good explanation. Beaver Lake is off limits to me for a while. I think I'll just continue exploring and hanging out on the slightly more populated side of the park. So, we talked to our neighbors, and on that specific night, they were in our shop, working on a car. They said they had a machine running, so I didn't and would not have heard the noise. Today, they found one of their chickens buried in the snow. They assume it's a bobcat since they have killed 4 in the last month that we've been out there. Supposedly, though we have only seen one that they trapped and all that was left of the bait chicken was a claw on the side of the cage they trapped him in. The chicken they found in the coop had his head bitten off and guts torn out, but not eaten. Do bobcats normally just play with them? Or would they take it and eat it? We don't know. But when this chicken was killed, we were assuming it was the night that we had heard the noise. I don't know anything about bobcats, so if you could let me know and explain to me, that would be great. So, an update. I just heard that a great horned owl will do this to a chicken, which is something that we have heard out here, but not specifically seen. In fact, I was just outside on the phone, and who I was on the phone with could hear the ambulance on the turnpike going by. We were close enough to hear everything, but barely seen the turnpike, unless standing on a hill. As it was going by, our neighbor's dog was howling. The family of deer were chilling as usual. And then out of nowhere, it was like all throughout the woods, surrounding us, was this noise. At first, I wasn't panicking. It started off sounding like a bunch of geese or something taking off. Then, began to sound like people screaming for their lives. I started to panic. Even the deer were frozen with their heads up. It abruptly stopped and then started right back up, so I called my husband out to listen. And then it started to sound more clearly, like yelps. War cries, maybe? But not from a few people, not even from 20 people, but hundreds of them, all throughout the woods surrounding our house. I thought maybe coyotes, but I haven't heard that many like that. And I've read that even if it's just a few, they can make it to sound like it's a lot more. But it honestly didn't even sound like a coyote. Since being here, 2 bobcats have been caught, but even then it didn't sound anything like a bobcat. So really, I'm here to ask if it's even possible for one of those things we can't say or anything the nature of be out there, even though we really aren't even that close to any type of reservation. And if not, what could it have possibly been? It was so eerie that I'm still shaking, goosebumps, and it's echoing still in my head. I'm not one to get scared like this, but it was very bizarre. This happened not so long ago, but I haven't told anyone, simply for the fact that I didn't want to seem crazy. It was January 16th, somewhere around 9:45 when I left the house. The area I live in is small, and there's not a lot of places to hang out at. But my friend lives less than a mile away, so I decided to pay them a visit. I walked for half an hour until I came upon a ditch. I've been in this ditch multiple times during the day and night, so I didn't think anything of it when I saw it. I decided it'd be easier than following the main road, so I went inside the ditch. Worst decision of my life. About 5 minutes after I entered the ditch, I heard some twigs break, so I looked in the general direction I heard the sound in. I kid you not, I saw something run into the nearby bushes. It was skinny and gray. I freaked out and walked a little faster, but then I heard it following me. I decided to try and have a conversation with it. I talked for a bit about nonsense, about how the police would look for me if I went missing, and how people knew where I was, which of course was a lie, but what else can you do in a situation like that? I talked for about 10 minutes and then broke off into a full-blown sprint. I could still feel its eyes on me the entire time, like it had kept up with me. I felt its glare until I came up to some houses and eventually got to my friends. I don't know if it was a skinwalker or some guy who could just run incredibly fast and keep up with my every move, but that was the scariest moment of my life. I think I've had an experience and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Me and my friend were walking towards a park to go hang out, and then we discovered this sewer system. We decided to check it out because we were stupid. There was a grate covering it, but the bars were bent open, enough that me and her could squeeze in. She had a really bad feeling about it. She's a super intuitive person when it comes to paranormal stuff, but I just ignored it further and went in. There was a big room area that the grate led into, and it had a grate on the top where light was shining through. There was a big tunnel leading right, and a small tunnel up high that I couldn't reach on the left. The room was partially filled with water at the bottom, and there was some graffiti on the walls of the tunnels. As I looked to the left, it was super dark, so I couldn't see very well. But a long ways down there was another grate, and there was some light leaking in. I could see a long lanky thing stretched out that looked like a really skinny arm? I couldn't see a body because it was further closer to me where it was darker, and I could only see it because it was in front of the light, so it was shining behind it and made it pop out. Sorry if this is worded weird, I don't know how else to describe it. It looked like an arm stretched out, and it wasn't moving. I ignored it, thinking it was probably just a plank of wood or something propped up, because there were some planks of wood in the room I was in. I decided to stack some rocks by the left tunnel so that I could reach it and look in. As I looked through the tunnel, there was another room far down the tunnel, and it had a grate on top like my room. The light was leaking in. Then I noticed this gray hunched over figure with an extremely bony body. It didn't have any clothes on or hair from what I could see. Its body looked super malnourished. I couldn't see its head or its legs since the tunnel was really small. All I could really see was its back, part of its neck, and the tops of its arms. It also wasn't moving, and by this point, I was freaking out. I went back to my friend and told her what I saw. I asked her for her phone so I could take a picture to show her, since she refused to go in there herself. I took the picture, and then we hightailed it out of there. I sadly don't have the picture because the phone it was taken on had gotten lost. We have gone back a couple of times, but never saw anything like it since. The tunnels were just empty. I think the figure were either crawlers or greys, maybe. If anyone has any information on greys, please let me know. I can't find much about them. Sorry if this is badly worded, it's pretty late. If anyone needs me to elaborate on something, I'd be happy to do so. Anyone have any idea what it is or have anything similar happen to them? Oh, a quick update for you. My friend that was just there at the time just told me some more information about the sewers. The sewers connect to the army depot that is around in the area where they do testing on animals. Maybe this is one of the test subjects. I was headed home from work at around 11 p.m. or later. I remember it was a bit on the cool side. I believe it was late fall or early winter. I was not far from the old sanitation department off the highway when I caught with my headlights a large upright creature that straddled the fence without missing a beat. The fence was near a ditch, and the fence was still about 4 feet high. The closest homes were only about a half mile down the road. This was mostly intersecting fields. A blonde Bigfoot is the closest I can get to describing what I saw that night. It made me so scared that it took hours to calm down when getting back to an empty house. I grew up on the farm and love hiking to this day. I am very observant, and in my life I have seen more than a few mountain lions, white squirrels, and even a black deer, so I pay attention and get out a lot. I have never been able to convince myself it was anything else. It was upright and appeared to be a dark blonde color in my headlights, and very fast. When I was a little boy in the early 90s, I lived in Bandytown in Boone County, West Virginia, and as a kid, I remember being friends with this neighborhood boy who suddenly got snatched up while playing in the woods with his older brother and killed. The older brother claimed while playing he'd watched a huge black cat run up and grab his brother by the head or neck and took off with him. When they found his little body, it was torn up pretty bad from what I'd heard. His neck was broken and his face was partially eaten. But no one really believed the older brother's story about a panther, and officials just chalked it up to a bear attack. Although everyone involved agreed it didn't look like a typical bear mauling, which was common where I was from. They never found the animal during hunting, so parents around the area were definitely a lot more touchy about us playing outside at the time, and no one I knew was allowed to play outside at night anymore because the old folks talked about hearing what sounded like a baby crying or a woman screaming deep in the mountains behind their houses. But a couple months after the boy's funeral, things settled down a bit, and I remember playing around an old empty lot near my home besides this huge mountain. I think I was down on the ground playing with a gardener snake or maybe some bug when I heard something that sounded like grunts and obviously got my attention. I lift my head up and here's this big and slim black panther-like animal standing up from the tall weeds about 20 to 30 feet away behind the fence that blocked the lot from the mountain. This thing was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I can't remember every detail, but its snout was long and chunkier, almost like a dog's, not like a cougar or cheetah, and its tail was very long, and it stayed in this J-like bend shape the entire time. It watched me for a while, not moving an inch and never taking its eyes off me, with its head low to the ground and mouth slightly hung open. But my screaming and hollering scared it away, or it lost interest, because it didn't take long after I started hollering for it to turn around and shoot back up the side of the mountain and out of sight. Still, to this day, I'd bet everything I own that what I saw was the same thing that had grabbed that little boy, because I only lived like 10 to 15 houses down from where he did and was playing at. I remember back when Monster Quest still came on the History Channel, they did an episode about Appalachian big cats and showed a few shots of supposed Black Panthers seen around the West Virginia and Appalachian area. It really hit me hard and brought up a lot of bad memories, to say the least. Please remember to be respectful. A child's death is never an easy subject. It was mid-January, a few years back in New York. I always loved the wintertime because of how cold and snowy everything was, but now I can't shake the feeling that there was more than just woods and snow out in a wintry forest. My family were upstate for the weekend to have some good bonding. I just wanted to explore the forest. I was allowed to go out into the woodland by myself as long as I stuck to the path. I was out there for about 18 minutes before I started noticing something. I looked around curiously to explore the forest's beauty when I noticed a very awkward-looking mound of snow, or at least I thought it was a mound. I looked at it closely, but it was far too far deep into the forest for me to see any real features. I thought nothing of it and decided to go back home. After 2 minutes, I felt I was being watched and kept on looking around me. I convinced myself it was just squirrels, and I kept on retreating. I smelled an awful stench to my left, causing me to jolt to my side, looking for whatever was out there. That same mound was there again, but it looked like something else. It had these twisted bones extending into the skin and had pale white skin. Under extinct alone, I started booking it back to the house. I heard something chase me from the woods. Luckily for me, I had multiple first place track finishes, and I was running a straight, which in the end allowed me to get back home quickly. I got back into the view of my house and sprinted up to the porch. I looked back into the forest and saw the rustling of leaves coming up to the edge, then nothing. It just stopped and the stench faded away. For some reason, I never told anyone except my 2 best friends, who dismissed it as me messing with them. I hope I can find more answers for whatever it was I saw that day. About 4 years ago, on it's getting dark pretty early fall evening, around 7 p.m., my girlfriend and roommate and I were walking along some decommissioned Washington train tracks surrounded by woods on both sides. We love exploring little in-between areas, so this wasn't an uncommon event. We were about 5 miles into the tracks and woods and were considering heading back since it was just getting dark quickly, and none of us had flashlights. I suddenly got the sensation of almost nausea-inducing dread and looked at both my friends who were with me, and saw that they too were feeling something, wide-eyed and looking around. "Let's start heading back," I declare, and they all nod in silent agreement. Mind you, we were doing just fine a second ago, and to do this sort of thing all the time, so this sudden onset of fear was unusual and not something that we were prepared for or used to. Just as we were turned around, we all heard a strange sound that almost sounded like quieted thunder, metal hitting metal, that was coming from what sounded like off in the distance. As we whipped around to see what made the noise, A large white bird that I think was a white owl flew over our heads silently, flapping its wings and disappearing behind a tree that was a good 25 feet behind us. We all looked at each other, trying to make sense of what the hell we all just heard, and then started walking briskly back towards civilization. We heard what sounded like twigs snapping in the woods behind us, and my girlfriend and I turned around to see what made the noise. Peeking from behind the tree, the owl just flew behind, was what looked like an impossibly tall, ghost white, humanoid shape, with one hand on the tree trunk as it peered out from behind it. Before we can get a good look at its face, it quickly retreated back to behind the tree and out of our sight again. My girlfriend and I looked at each other, panicked. She opened her mouth to say something, and I told her, "Don't talk about it, we need to walk faster." My roommate looked at us confused and clearly scared by what I had just said, so I told him we need to probably run home at this point, which we did. I've told a few people this story, and honestly, no one believes me. What I saw was not the owl I had seen earlier. This being had a clear ghost white hand on the tree trunk, a neck and an upper body, and was tall. I'd say like 7 feet at least. Not tall enough to reach the branches of the tree though. I wish I could have made out the face. It was just so dark that the only reason I could see it was because of how white it was. For the past few nights, a skinwalker has been outside of my house. Last night it started tapping on random windows. Tonight, I was outside and the crickets went silent. My mother and I are generally very spiritual, and so on. Long story short, we know when something evil is nearby. We're in Glendale, Arizona, in case any of you are worried about the location. To give you my first update, my cat was full on leaning and scratching at the window, trying to get at something. She's very shy and reserved, so this was weird. Second update. My mom woke up early around the time when it was still dark and went outside to smoke a cigarette. She heard whistling, and our new dog was whining and trying to get my mom inside. She was happy to go in. Only the dead whistle at night. Update 3. Someone knocked on the door in broad daylight. I looked outside, but nobody was there. No packages, no bugs, nothing. The knocking sounded urgent and loud. The fourth and final update. My mother still hears whistling every time she goes outside when it's dark, coming from the direction of a building behind our house. I can feel them getting closer each day. I've had strange experiences since I was a kid, but this was definitely the most terrifying one. I had been living in the Middle East for about 4 years at that time. I got back from work one night, had dinner, watched TV, and went to bed after midnight. I hadn't fallen asleep yet. I'm 100% sure I was awake and aware of everything around me. I was just lying in bed, on my side, one hand under the pillow, facing the edge of the bed, and thinking about what had to be done the next day, when I felt something warm near me. The same way you can feel the warmth of a body very close to you, even though it isn't touching you. This thing didn't touch me. It started breathing deeply, so close to my neck I could feel its warm breath on my skin. And it spoke. I can immediately identify the Arabic language, even though I can't speak it. But this thing didn't speak Arabic. It was something else. Similar, but something else. And it wasn't like this had lips or even a physical body. For the way it spoke, it's like its voice came directly from the creature's throat and sounded like a growl. Very guttural. My reaction was instinctive. I remember the fear I felt down my spine and the scream that I let out. I just kicked and punched in the air, pushing myself away from that thing. I was up in a flash and turned the light on. There was nothing there. Of course, my heart was racing. I was scared to death and I couldn't stop crying. I had to turn the TV on and watch silly cartoons till the sun came up. Later on, I told my partner at the time. He's a Muslim, and he was convinced it was a jinn. I'm not a religious person, but I do believe there's more out there than just the things our senses can feel. I have another story from when I was very young. It's not related, but friends also think I've encountered another jinn. If your fan base is interested, I could also share that experience. Has anyone experienced a similar occurrence? To paint this picture, I was born in 2002, and my entire childhood I was obsessed with fairies. At some point, I began to get pieces of paper and write messages to fairies. I would tape them in various fairy places around my house. I had one above my bed, and the last one I put up before I saw the fairies was on a chair on my outside porch. I always wrote asking them to visit me. I remember they finally came one night at 3:10 a.m. I randomly woke up and saw tiny little balls of light around my piles of books I kept in bed. Until this event, I had always pictured fairies looking like little people with wings. One of them, or a few of them, I don't remember, were singing something. I remember the lights were red, orange, and yellow. Unfortunately, although I had always wanted to meet them, after a few seconds I screamed and ran to my parents' room and slept in their bed. The next day I drew pictures of the light and showed it to my parents. I don't think I still have the pictures, but sometime soon I'm going to look around for it. I regretted running away from them, and once college apps are finished, I'm going to spend the winter trying to figure out what happened and if I can contact the fairies again. All of the things I've read online about people meeting fairies describe them as people. Do you think the balls of light were something other than fairies? Additionally, some people think that what happened was a dream since I was into fairies and it happened at night. But y'all gotta trust me that it was really real.